The ultimatum. Julian Ashford stared at the contract on his desk, the words blurring together as afternoon sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. Outside, San Francisco stretched beneath him, a glittering testament to everything he had built over the past decade. Ashford Technologies had become a household name, revolutionizing cloud security systems and making Julian one of the youngest billionaires in Silicon Valley. But none of that mattered now. His family's investment firm, the foundation that had funded his startup, was collapsing, and the only way to save it was sitting in front of him, bound in leather and stamped with gold lettering, an arranged marriage. Contract. His father's voice still echoed in his ears from their meeting that morning. Julian, this is not just about money. The Harrington family has the connections we need. Their daughter has agreed to the arrangement. All you have to do is sign. His father had looked older than Julian remembered, worn down by the stress of watching his life's work crumble. Your mother's medical treatments alone cost more than most people make in a lifetime. We need this merger. We need this stability. Julian had wanted to argue, to fight back against the archaic notion that marriages could still be arranged like business deals in the 21st century, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. His younger sister was in graduate school. His mother was battling an illness that required constant care. Dozens of employees depended on both companies surviving. Personal desires seemed selfish in the face of so many people counting on him. Ghosts of the past, he pushed away from his desk and walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. The truth was, Julian had stopped believing in love anyway. 4 years ago, he had been engaged to a woman named Catherine Winters. She was everything he thought he wanted: ambitious, intelligent, and captivating. They had met at a tech conference, and their relationship moved quickly. Fueled by late-night conversations about changing the world and building something meaningful together, Julian had planned an elaborate proposal, renting out the entire rooftop of their favorite restaurant, filling it with candles and her favorite flowers. He had been ready to promise her forever, but 2 days before he could propose, he discovered the truth. Catherine had been feeding confidential information about Ashford Technologies to a rival company. She had been offered an executive position in exchange for insider knowledge. When he confronted her, she had not even bothered to deny it or apologize. You were a stepping stone, Julian, she had said coldly, a means to an end. Did you really think I loved you? The words had cut deeper than any betrayal of corporate secrets. What hurt most was not losing her, but realizing he had never truly known her at all. He had poured his heart into someone who saw him only as an opportunity. After that, Julian had built walls around himself. He dated occasionally, but kept every relationship surface level. He told himself that real love was a myth, something people convinced themselves existed to avoid facing the cold reality that most relationships were transactional. Everyone wanted something. Everyone had an agenda. At least an arranged marriage was honest about what it was: a business agreement with clear terms and no false promises. The decision, knock on the door, pulled Julian from his thoughts. His assistant, Graham, poked his head in. Mr. Ashford, the lawyer is here with the final documents. Should I send him in? Julian took a deep breath and nodded. Give me 5 minutes, then? Yes. When the door closed, Julian returned to his desk and read through the contract one more time. The terms were straightforward and surprisingly considerate. Both parties would maintain separate residences if desired. There were no expectations of physical intimacy unless mutually agreed upon. They would appear together at 6 major public events over the course of 1 year to maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage. After 12 months, they could quietly divorce if they chose, with neither party suffering financial penalty. All assets would remain separate. The bride's identity would remain confidential until the wedding day, a stipulation from her family to protect her privacy. Julian's pen hovered over the signature line. Something about not knowing who she was bothered him more than he expected. What kind of woman agreed to marry a stranger? Was she being forced into this the same way he was? Did she have her own ghosts haunting her, her own reasons for giving up on love? He thought about his mother, currently resting at home after another round of treatments. He thought about his father's desperate expression that morning. He thought about all the people whose livelihoods depended on these companies surviving. Personal happiness seemed like a luxury he could not afford. Signing away tomorrow, Graham returned with the lawyer, a thin man named Robert Fitzgerald, who had handled Ashford family legal matters for 30 years. "Julian," Robert said gently, sitting across from him, "I want you to know that you still have a choice here. There are other ways to restructure the companies, though none as immediate or certain as this arrangement." Julian appreciated the sentiment, but they both knew the truth. Other options would take years and might fail anyway. This marriage was the quickest path to stability. "I understand," Julian said. "Let's proceed." Robert opened his briefcase and laid out several documents. "The ceremony is scheduled for 3 weeks from today at the Fairmont Hotel. Your bride has agreed to all terms. Her family has requested minimal contact before the wedding, which is why you have not been introduced. They believe it will make the transition easier if you meet for the first time in a formal setting." Julian found that absurd but did not argue. He signed his name across multiple pages, each stroke of the pen feeling like he was closing a door on the life he might have had. When he finished, Robert collected the documents with practiced efficiency. "Congratulations," he said, though the word felt hollow. "I will file these immediately. You are now legally committed to the arrangement." After Robert left, Julian sat alone in his office as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had just agreed to marry a woman whose face he had never seen, whose voice he had never heard, whose dreams and fears were complete mysteries to him. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like a betrayal of everything he once believed about love and partnership. Instead, it just felt empty. Julian stood and gathered his things, preparing to head home to his sterile penthouse apartment. In 3 weeks, his life would change forever. In 3 weeks, he would stand at an altar and bind himself to a stranger. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a tiny voice whispered a question he could not answer. What if fate had other plans? The morning of forever, Julian woke before dawn on his wedding day, his mind refusing to grant him the mercy of sleep. The penthouse was silent except for the distant hum of the city waking below. He had lived in this space for 6 years, surrounded by sleek furniture and expensive art that meant nothing to him. It was a showpiece, not a home. Perhaps that was fitting for a man about to enter a marriage. That was more performance than partnership. He made coffee and stood by the window, watching the sky shift from deep purple to soft pink. In a few hours, he would meet his bride for the first time. The thought sent an unfamiliar flutter through his chest, something between anxiety and curiosity. He had spent 3 weeks trying not to think about her, throwing himself into work to avoid dwelling on the unknown. But now, with the ceremony just hours away, he could not stop wondering who she was. The preparation team arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, transforming his penthouse into a staging area. His stylist, an energetic woman named Diane, fussed over every detail of his charcoal gray suit. "You need to look perfect," she insisted, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. "The photos from today will follow you forever." Julian almost laughed at the irony. He was about to marry a stranger. But everyone was worried about how he looked in photographs. His best friend and business partner, Thomas Nguyen, arrived mid-morning with coffee and a concerned expression. Thomas was one of the few people who knew the truth about the arrangement. "How are you holding up?" Thomas asked, settling onto the leather couch. Julian shrugged, fastening his cufflinks. "I signed a contract. Now I am fulfilling it. Nothing complicated about that." Thomas studied him with the knowing look of someone who had been friends with Julian since their college days at Stanford. "You can admit this is difficult. You do not have to pretend with me. What good would admitting it do?" Julian said, his voice sharper than intended. "The decision is made. Second-guessing it now serves no purpose." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I just hope she is kind. You deserve that much, at least." The words stuck with Julian as he finished dressing. Kindness seemed like such a simple thing to hope for, yet it felt almost radical in the context of an arranged marriage. He had been so focused on duty and obligation that he had not considered the possibility that his bride might be someone decent, someone who was suffering through this arrangement just as much as he was. The venue, the Fairmont Hotel, had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. All white roses and soft golden lighting, Julian arrived through a private entrance, avoiding the small gathering of press outside. The media coverage had been carefully controlled, with only select outlets invited to photograph what they believed was a romantic union between two prominent families. If they only knew the truth, a wedding coordinator named Patricia guided him through the final preparations. "Your bride is in the opposite wing," she explained. "Per the family's request, you will not see each other until the ceremony begins. She will walk down the aisle, and you will be waiting at the altar." Julian nodded, his throat tight. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. In less than an hour, he would be married to a complete stranger. He was led to a private room where he waited with Thomas and his father. His father looked relieved, almost peaceful for the first time in months. "Thank you for doing this, son," he said quietly. "I know it is not what you wanted." Julian did not respond. What could he say? That he resented being forced into this position? That he felt like a pawn in a game he never agreed to play? Instead, he simply straightened his jacket and focused on breathing steadily. The moment arrives, the music began. A string quartet playing something classical and elegant. Patricia appeared at the door. "Mr. Ashford, it is time." Julian followed her down a corridor, his footsteps echoing on marble floors. The ceremony was being held in the hotel's grand ballroom, a space with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. As he entered from a side door, he saw rows of guests rising to their feet. Business associates, family, friends, people he barely knew, all there to witness what they thought was a love story. He took his place at the altar beside the officiant, a distinguished older man with kind eyes. Thomas stood beside him as best man, offering a reassuring nod. Julian's hands were steady, but his mind raced. Every second felt stretched, elongated by anticipation. Then the doors at the far end opened, and the room fell silent. The bride appeared, framed by light from the hallway behind her. Her dress was simple but breathtaking, ivory silk that flowed like water as she moved. A delicate veil covered her face completely, obscuring her features. Two attendants held the edges of her train as she began the long walk down the aisle. Julian watched her approach, and with each step, something inside him shifted. There was something familiar about the way she moved, grace combined with nervousness that tugged at a memory he could not quite grasp. Her hands were clasped tightly around a bouquet of white orchids, and he could see them trembling even from a distance. She reached the altar and stood before him. So close he could hear her breathing beneath the veil. It was unsteady, anxious. She was afraid. The realization hit him with unexpected force. This woman, whoever she was just as terrified as he was. They were both trapped in this moment, both fulfilling obligations that felt too heavy to bear. The officiant began speaking, his voice warm and practiced. "We gather today to witness the union of Julian Ashford and Rebecca Moore in marriage." Her name was Rebecca. Julian repeated it silently, testing how it felt. The unveiling, the ceremony proceeded with traditional vows and readings. Julian spoke his lines mechanically, promising things he was not sure he could deliver. When Rebecca spoke, her voice was soft but steady, carrying a quiet strength that surprised him. There was something achingly familiar about that voice, though he could not place why. Then came the moment he had been both dreading and anticipating. The officiant smiled gently and said, "The groom may now lift the veil." Time seemed to slow. Julian reached forward, his hand surprisingly steady despite the chaos in his mind. He grasped the delicate lace and slowly lifted it, watching as it drifted upward and away from her face. The world stopped. Julian's breath caught in his throat, his heart slamming against his ribs with sudden, overwhelming force. He knew this face. He knew those eyes, warm brown and filled with the same recognition that must have been showing in his own. Rebecca Moore was the woman who had saved his life. 2 years ago, the memory it had been late autumn, and Julian had been driving back from a business meeting in Napa Valley. A sudden storm had rolled in, turning the roads treacherous. He had been distracted, thinking about quarterly reports and market projections, when his car hydroplaned on a curve. The vehicle spun out of control and crashed into a ditch. The impact violent, enough to deploy the airbags and leave him dazed and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He had been alone on that rural road. Rain pounding against the wreckage, his phone dead and useless. He had thought he might die there undiscovered until morning, but then a car had pulled over. A small sedan with a dented bumper. And from it had emerged a young woman with an umbrella and the kindest eyes he had ever seen. She had called for help, staying with him the entire time. She had used her scarf to apply pressure to his wound, talking to him calmly to keep him conscious. "Stay with me," she had said. "Help is coming. You are going to be fine." When the ambulance arrived, she had tried to slip away, but Julian had caught her hand. "Thank you," he had whispered. "What is your name?" "Rebecca," she had said with a gentle smile. "Just Rebecca. I am glad you are okay." By the time he had been released from the hospital the next day, she was gone. He had tried to find her, asking the police and the hospital staff, but no one had her contact information. She had disappeared like something out of a dream, leaving him with only a memory of compassion in his darkest moment. And now she was standing before him, his bride, his wife, the woman fate had brought back into his life in the most unexpected way possible. "Recognition, it is you," Julian whispered, his voice raw with emotion he could not contain. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, though she held them back with visible effort. "Hello, Julian," she said softly. "I did not know it would be you either. Not until I saw your name on the contract." The guests watched with polite smiles, unaware of the magnitude of what was happening. They saw a romantic moment between newlyweds. They had no idea they were witnessing the collision of past and present. Chance and destiny. The officiant, sensing the couple needed a moment, spoke gently. "You may seal your union with a kiss." Julian barely heard him. He was lost in Rebecca's eyes, in the impossible reality that the woman he had searched for, the woman who had shown him genuine kindness when he needed it most, was now bound to him by law and circumstance. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not move. Their lips met in a kiss that was supposed to be ceremonial, but felt like so much more. It was soft, tentative, and charged with 2 years of unanswered questions and the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. When they pulled apart, Rebecca's cheeks were flushed, and Julian felt something crack open inside his chest, something he had kept locked away since Catherine's betrayal. It was not love, not yet, but it was possibility. It was hope. The guests applauded as the officiant announced them as husband and wife. Julian took Rebecca's hand, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers, and led her back down the aisle. With every step, his mind raced with questions. Why had she agreed to this arrangement? What circumstances had forced her into a marriage with a stranger? And most importantly, could this impossible situation somehow become something real? The reception in the hotel's ballroom had been transformed for the reception. With round tables draped in cream linens and centerpieces of white roses, a string quartet played soft music as guests mingled with champagne and conversation. Julian and Rebecca sat at the head table, maintaining the appearance of a happy couple while staff, photographers captured every angle. But beneath the surface performance, Julian's mind churned with questions. Rebecca sat beside him, her posture graceful but tense, occasionally offering polite smiles to guests who approached with congratulations. They had barely spoken since the ceremony, both trapped in the ritual of greeting family and business associates who knew nothing of the truth. During a brief lull, Julian leaned toward her and spoke quietly. "We need to talk. Privately." Rebecca nodded without looking at him. "There is a terrace on the 3rd floor. I saw it when they were preparing earlier. Can you meet me there in 10 minutes? Julian agreed, and they both stood, making excuses about needing a moment to freshen up before dinner. The terrace overlooked the city. San Francisco spread out beneath them in a tapestry of lights as evening descended. Julian arrived first, loosening his tie and breathing in the cool air. When Rebecca appeared through the glass doors, she had removed her veil, and he could finally see her fully. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, though there was a sadness in her eyes that had not been there 2 years ago. "Rebecca's story, I owe you an explanation," Rebecca said. standing several feet away, as if afraid to come closer. When I signed the contract and saw your name, I almost backed out. But by then it was too late. My family had already committed to the arrangement. Julian moved closer, keeping his voice gentle. Tell me what happened. Why did you agree to this? Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, staring out at the city. 2 years ago, I was working as a freelance graphic designer. I had a small studio, a modest life, and I was happy. My father ran a construction company. Nothing huge, but it supported our family and employed about 30 people. She paused, her expression pained. Then my brother got sick. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The treatments were expensive and our insurance only covered a portion. My father took out loans against the business to pay for everything. He would have done anything to save his son. Julian's chest tightened as he listened. Did your brother recover? A sad smile crossed Rebecca's face. Yes, he is in remission now, healthy and finishing his senior year of high school. But the business never recovered. My father could not pay back the loans. He was going to lose everything, including our family home that was tied up as collateral. She finally turned to look at Julian. The Harrington family approached my father 6 months ago. They needed someone connected to your family through marriage to secure a financial merger. They offered to clear all his debts and provide enough capital to save the business. All he had to do was convince me to agree to marry their chosen candidate. And you said yes to save your family, Julian said quietly. Rebecca nodded. My father never asked me to do it. He was horrified when the Harringtons first suggested it, but I saw what the stress was doing to him. He had already sacrificed so much for my brother. How could I not do this for him? Julian's confession silence settled between them, heavy with understanding. Julian moved to stand beside her at the railing, their shoulders almost touching. I was forced into this too, he said. My family's investment firm is collapsing. They needed the Harrington connections to survive. My mother is sick, my sister is in school, and I have employees, depending on both companies staying afloat. When they presented the contract, I felt like I had no choice. Rebecca looked at him with surprise. You did not want this either? Julian gave a bitter laugh. I thought I would be marrying a stranger who was in it for the money or the prestige. Some ambitious person looking to climb the social ladder. I never imagined, trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. That it would be me, Rebecca, completed softly. The woman from the accident? Julian turned to face her fully. Rebecca, that night changed something in me. After you helped me, I tried to find you. I wanted to thank you properly, to understand why you stopped when no one else would have. You disappeared before I could learn anything about you. Rebecca's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I did not think you would remember me. It was just one night and you were injured. I was just doing what anyone should do. Julian shook his head firmly. Not anyone. Most people would have driven past. But you stopped. You stayed. You showed me kindness without expecting anything in return. In a world where everyone wants something from me, you were the one person who just wanted to help. He took a breath, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. When I saw your face today, when I realized who you were, everything changed. This arrangement we were forced into suddenly felt like something else entirely. Like maybe fate was trying to tell us something. A tentative understanding. Rebecca studied his face, searching for sincerity. You really mean that? This is not just relief at discovering your bride is not a complete stranger. Julian considered the question seriously. I would be lying if I said relief was not part of it, but it is more than that. Rebecca, I stopped believing in love years ago. I was engaged once to a woman who betrayed me in the worst way. She used me for business connections and threw me away when she got a better offer. After that, I built walls around myself. I told myself that real connection was impossible, that everyone had ulterior motives. He moved closer, his voice dropping. But you proved that wrong. 2 years ago, you helped a stranger with no thought of reward. You were genuine in a way I had forgotten people could be. And now, here we are, brought together by circumstances neither of us chose, but maybe that is exactly what we both needed. Rebecca's breath hitched. I am scared, Julian. I am terrified of disappointing you, of not being enough for this world you live in. I am just a graphic designer from a middle-class family. I do not know how to navigate business dinners and society events. I do not belong in penthouses and boardrooms. Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. You belonged the moment you chose compassion over convenience. Everything else is just details we can figure out together. He squeezed her hand gently. I have a proposal. The contract says we have to stay married for 1 year, appear at 6 public events together, and then we can part ways if we choose. But what if we actually tried? Not as strangers fulfilling an obligation, but as 2 people who fate keeps pushing together. Rebecca's eyes widened. What do you mean? Julian's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture that felt both natural and electrifying. I mean, we give this marriage a real chance. We get to know each other. We build something genuine instead of just pretending for cameras. No pressure, no expectations beyond honesty and respect. If after a year we decide this is not working, we part as friends. But if something real develops, he left the possibility hanging in the air between them. A new beginning. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. The city lights sparkled below them, and the sound of the reception drifted through the glass doors. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I would like that. I would like to try. Relief flooded through Julian, surprising him with its intensity. Then let us start now. Tell me about yourself. Real things, not the polite small talk we would share in front of guests. A small smile touched Rebecca's lips, the first genuine one he had seen all day. What do you want to know? Julian thought for a moment. What were you doing on that road 2 years ago? Why were you out there during a storm? Rebecca's smile grew. I was coming back from delivering artwork to a client in Sonoma, a small winery that wanted custom labels designed. I almost canceled because of the weather, but I needed the money. When I saw your car in the ditch, I just reacted. I could not drive past someone who might be hurt. That says everything about who you are, Julian said softly. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for staying with me. They talked for another hour on that terrace, sharing pieces of themselves while the reception continued without them. Rebecca told him about her love of painting, her complicated relationship with her father, who had always been traditional and overprotective, and her dream of opening her own design studio someday. Julian told her about building Ashford Technologies from nothing, the loneliness that came with success, and his complicated feelings about family obligation.